How's it going? This is Mr. Miles coming to the podcast. In today's podcast, we will be talking about protists. Yay. Protists. Okay, so if you recall, everything we've been talking about so far is outside the line of living. We have the viruses. Okay, then we have our domains, kingdoms, phylums, class, order, family, genus, species. And if this doesn't make any sense to you, go back to the beginning of the bacteria lesson and I'll talk a little bit more about this. But under domain, when we get to the land of living, we're going to have bacteria, okay, and then we're going to have archaea. There we go. Okay, now both these guys together are known as the prokaryotes, and for a long time they were both in just one group. But then we found the archaea, which are known as extremophiles. They're a lot like bacteria, but they have subtle differences in that they like really hot, really cold, really dry, really acidic, really basic environments. So then we're like, oh crap, we got to come up with a new group. Okay, so remember, because these are prokaryotes, these are both going to be unicellular, and they're both going to have no nucleus. So that brings us to the last domain, the eukaryotes. Where in the eukaryotes, we split off into 4 kingdoms. So remember, that's the next level. You have the first one, which is protist. Then you have the fungus, then you have the plants, then you have the animals. Now today what we're going to focus on is this one, the protist group. Now the protist group are cool because they have primarily 3 different types. They have the fungus-like, they have the plant-like, and then they'll have the animal-like. There we go. But they're so cool that they get their own name. They are called the protozoans. Okay, and that's the animal-like dudes. So fungus-like, plant-like, animal-like, protozoans. And so these are all protists. Now, I am looking here, and from everything I've seen recently, actually, they like to start to stick these into the different locations, if they're related to fungus, related to protists, related to animals, with their groups. But for our sake, we're going to keep them as their own separate group, because these guys were actually the first eukaryotes to evolve, pretty much, because these guys are the first ones that are going to show up with a nucleus, with that centralized center for holding that genetic information, thus enabling beings to become more complex as time went on, because you could have that protected, elongated DNA and stuff like that. So let's do as I guess the book in the corny way says, protists, the saga continues. I feel like there should have been an explosion right after that. I don't know. But either way, so we get into our protists, and let's talk about a few different things. Now we know that they're all eukaryotes, so they're all going to have a nucleus, like I just said. Okay, they're split up into 3 different groups, and they also have some really cool structures about them. So let's talk about the structures. We're very familiar with the flagella, so let's draw a little euglena. Now he's an animal-like protist. He's called a protozoan. So here's a euglena. It'll have a little red eye spot. And these guys are actually really easily recognizable because this spot is actually a nice, beautiful red. I gotta draw it red. These euglenas are so cool. And these guys are actually green, but they have a red eye spot. You may say, well, what's the point of having a red eye spot? Well, the thing is that these guys are actually photosynthetic. There's actually a little chloroplast inside of the euglena, and so it uses eye spot in order to detect light. Now, it can't see things in the fashion sense that we do, like shapes and colors and stuff like that, but it uses eye spot to detect light, and it'll get really close to that light place, and then it has this little chloroplast, and I don't know what I'm drawing here, but I'm going to go ahead and pretend those are chloroplasts. And it uses the chloroplast to do photosynthesis to feed itself. And it uses the flagella in order to move around. Now, flagella is really the one that we're most primarily used to seeing with these little unicellular organisms. However, there are other ones. Now, this little bugger right here is called the paramecium. Now, the paramecium, he has what looks like a whole bunch of little shortened flagellum. And they all branch off the paramecium. And let me keep branching it off. And we're branching. And these are called cilia. Now cilia are little hair-like structures that act almost like as oars in a boat to move something along. So it flicks those hairs back and it's able to move forward. And it's actually really cool to see their movements. Now, the paramecium will use this, the euglena will use the flagellum, But you have obviously little blobular dudes that are awesome. And so this right here is called the amoeba. So the amoeba is very blob-like in structure, and this is actually what the blob was modeled after. And when they move, they use something called a pseudopod. Okay, and this word may seem really confusing, but it's not. Remember, pseudo means false or fake. Okay, that's why when you have fake science, you call it pseudoscience. And pod just simply means foot. So it's a false foot that it has, and what they'll do is they'll simply glob out a section of them, so they'll glob it out forward, and then it'll adhere on here, and it'll pull the rest of the amoeba forward. And so it reaches out, and the rest of it gets pulled forward, and it just blobs along using the pseudopod. So these guys are cool. Now, obviously, if you notice, all of these guys are going to be obviously existing in very watery environments. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of water around them. Cilia and the flagellum aren't going to work unless you have a lot of water to move through. And even the amoeba is very blobular, so it needs to remain wet. So in order to maintain its balance, or homeostasis, which is one of the qualifying things making something living, they'll have to use something called a vacuole. Now a vacuole will be located inside of all these little creatures, and this thing will be able to take in excess water, and it spits that excess water out. Because these guys are always in water environments, so water's never a problem. Humans, you just see one of the problems that we have is we bloat and we get all pruny, and these guys don't want the same thing happen to it, especially because they're existing in it all the time. So they use this water vacuole to spit all that excess water out. Okay. Now they're going to reproduce in a variety of ways. They can either do asexual, which some of them will. And remember, that's just one parent making a genetic what the freaking kind of arrow is that? Oh my gosh. One parent making an exact copy of it. They can do sexual, where they can get two parents, one offspring, depending on what kind of protist it is, because remember, you saw how varied they were. Or again, you can have that sexual-ish. And these guys actually, just like the bacteria, some of them can do conjugation. So you can do conjugation. Now, again, you can see up here with how they're moving. Amoebas, these guys are going to be heterotrophs because they actually go find their food, and they're going to use probably a word that you haven't said in a long time. Remember endocytosis? It's because we talked about different types of diffusion. So you can do simple diffusion, just a bunch of things going from an area of high concentration to low concentration. You can do active transport, which is when you go against the grain. You can also have facilitated diffusion, when you have something that's so big, needs all that help getting through the channels, so that's facilitated. But we also talked about there's endocytosis, so if you're a big blobby thing, you want to move a really big thing in there, you just simply surround it, envelop it, and then it becomes a part of you. And so amoebas are going to be heterotrophs because they're going to do this endocytosis. These guys are going to be photosynthetic because they use that eye spot and its flagellum to get around to well-lit areas of sunlight, and some of them will use cilia to move around to become heterotrophs. So they can be both heterotrophs and autotrophs when they are feeding. So that's a little fun thing about them. Yay! Now there's a huge ecology of different types of them. So let's start first with the animal-like. So these are the animal-like protists, or again, like I said, it's the protozoans. And so let's talk about some of the fancier ones. And so, of course, you can have the amoebas, and these are blobular creatures that use that pseudopod to move around and eat things. You can have the paramecium, which is that cool single-cellular guy that has all the little cilia hairs to help move him around his environments. You have probably, I think it is the most deadly. Yeah, I think it is the most deadly of all of these little of organisms on land. I don't know, I think eukaryotes is definitely the most deadly. I have to look at bacteria, I'm not 100% sure. But it's this guy right here. And again, my arrows still suck. His name is the Plasmodium. Now the Plasmodium, what it causes malaria, and it's transmitted by the female mosquito. So when a mosquito bites you, you get these things growing inside of your cells, and it divides and multiplies, and then you get a whole bunch of plasmodiums going around everywhere. So that's just a little look into the different types of animal-like. Now, of course, you can also get the plant-like ones. The plant-like ones, of course, you get the weird guy like the Euglena, who I absolutely love, with the red eye spot. And he does plant-like photosynthesis, making him an autotroph, but at the same time, he's able to move around, unlike a plant, like an animal. And so that's a little bit different between those. But you can also get different, you have different types of algae. You have red algae, which actually, red algae is what they put in some ice creams. So enjoy your ice cream next time you're eating it, okay? I'm getting fancy with it. So there's your red algae, you have your brown algae, and then of course you have your green algae, which are all different types. Now, obviously this guy's unicellular like a lot of the guys I've been showing you before, but like the red algae, the brown algae, these guys are actually multicellular. So you can have different types like that. Let's see. Two of my other really favorite ones are the diatoms. The diatoms are these really cool guys that can make shells that are essentially kind of made out of glass. It's made out of silicates, which to us we'd say glass. And it makes these really intricate shells. Diatoms are really cool with that. You can find it mixed in with sand a lot of the times. And then you also have the dinoflagellates. And these guys, if you ever look up pictures of them, they look like almost like little shields and little helmets. Now, dinoflagellates are cool because they can also do bioluminescence, meaning if you make contact with them, they can light up. You can actually find YouTube videos of people throwing rocks in the water. And the rocks hit the water where there's dinoflagellates, it'll glow like a really cool blue. Dinoflagellates are also responsible for things called red tides. Now, dinoflagellates, like diatoms, are both unicellular. They also really like pollution because in pollution there's a lot of nitrates inside of it, and it allows them to multiply in huge numbers. That they will use up oxygen in order to divide and to exist. And so what they'll do is they'll actually suck all the oxygen out of the water into the many dinoflagellates that are growing in there. And because their numbers get so big, these dinoflagellates are actually a red color. So you get something called a red tide. So the water actually looks like blood. All the oxygen gets sucked out, and what makes it even creepier is that then fish will then float near the surface dead because of the red tides. And so, yeah, that's kind of terrifying. Anyway, so so that's red tides, and that's dinoflagellates. Now, of course, the last one is the fungus-like, and they are very similar to fungus, but there are a few differences, especially when we talk about funguses. And one of the most famous ones is water mold, and this has been viewed by probably most of you. If you ever see a fish that dies and it's been in the water for a long time, and it's got almost like that's a really crappy fish. It's almost got like these little like hair, like white wispy structures coming off of it. That is the fungus-like water mold. Then of course you have the really cool slime mold, and if you want, here's how it's spelled, just like you guess it is. You look that up on YouTube, and slime molds are actually really, really cool. So maybe you can hear my 5-year-old brain in the background apparently punching something. I don't know. That was distracting in the video. I don't know. Well, hopefully he fell over or something like that. I don't know. Either way, hope you enjoyed the video. I know it was a little bit of a long one. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. Again, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to email me, and I'll get you filled in. All right. Until next time. Talk to you later. Bye.